It was August 6th, 1945. The sun rose gently over Hiroshima, spilling gold across the Otter River and the tiled roofs of a city that still believed it had survived the worst. Children walked to school, clutching satchels. Women gathered in marketplaces, trading meager rations, and whispered hopes that the war might soon end. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea or just some water, and sit back as we begin this journey together. Above them, the sky was impossibly blue, a canvas of calm, unaware that history's most terrible shadow was already descending. At 8:15 a.m., the world split open from the belly of the Enola Gay. A single bomb fell, named Little Boy. It drifted down in silence, a small metal sphere carrying a universe of fire. In an instant, the city vanished in a flash brighter than the sun. Temperatures reached thousands of degrees. Skin burned to ash before screams could rise. Buildings dissolved into dust. Where life had stood moments before, there remained only silence, and shadows seared into walls. The shockwave rolled across miles, crushing bone and stone alike. Rivers boiled, air turned to flame. Tens of thousands perished before they understood what had happened. And in Tokyo, far to the east, word began to trickle through military channels. Hiroshima had gone silent, communications lost, a city erased. To the high command, it was impossible. No weapon, they believed, could do such a thing. Air raids destroyed blocks, not cities. Generals speculated about massive fuel air bombs or secret incendiary compounds, yet intelligence reports carried a chilling consistency. One plane, one bomb, one city destroyed. Across the Pacific, President Truman addressed the world. The United States had unleashed a new and most cruel bomb born from the harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The declaration sent tremors through the halls of Japan's government. A weapon of atomic fission, a concept known only to their most advanced scientists, had become a reality, and it belonged to their enemy. As night fell over Japan, the sky above Hiroshima still glowed red from unseen fires. In Tokyo, the generals sat in silence, trying to comprehend what no strategy could contain. The war that had consumed Asia and the Pacific for nearly a decade had entered its final unimaginable phase. For the Japanese high command, the truth was still hidden behind disbelief. But the world had changed forever, and in the days to come, they would see the evidence with their own eyes and understand that America's power was not just military, it was elemental. The message arrived in fragments, broken radio transmissions, garbled reports, rumors whispered by survivors stumbling out of smoke. Hiroshima was gone. Not damaged, gone. The Japanese high command gathered in Tokyo's Imperial Palace bunker, their faces lined with exhaustion and disbelief. Maps of the homeland lay spread across polished tables covered in red pins, marking devastation from American firebombing. But this was different. General Anami Korika, Minister of War, demanded clarity. How could a single attack erase an entire city? Tokyo had suffered infernos from hundreds of B-29s, yet Hiroshima had been struck by only one. Intelligence officers spoke cautiously. Their sources said the destruction extended for miles. The heart of the city was nothing but scorched earth, and at the center, a strange circular ruin where the bomb had burst in the air. Some in the council dismissed the reports as exaggerations or psychological warfare. The Americans, they reasoned, sought to frighten Japan into surrender. Others were not so sure. Their scientists had long theorized the possibility of splitting the atom, of releasing unimaginable energy, but they believed it would take years, decades, to make such a weapon real. Prime Minister Suzuki listened in silence, eyes downcast, the weight of defeat pressing on his shoulders. Foreign Minister Togo, ever pragmatic, urged investigation. They needed facts, not fears. A reconnaissance mission was dispatched, pilots flying cautiously through smoke and rising heat. When they returned, their words chilled the room. Hiroshima was flattened, roads melted, survivors burned beyond recognition. Nothing lived in the center. The generals still hesitated. Pride and duty forbade belief in miracles, even miracles of destruction. Some whispered that it was divine punishment, others that the Americans had captured the power of the gods. Yet, amid disbelief, came a deeper unease. If the Americans possessed one such bomb, how many more waited to fall? In the underground chamber, silence thickened. The empire had endured 4 years of war, countless sacrifices, cities reduced to cinders by fire raids. But this new weapon was not fire. It was something purer, colder, final. Anami clenched his fists. He would not surrender. Not yet. The military believed in the spirit of Yokuzai, honorable death, shattering like a jewel rather than yielding. They imagined a final battle on the home islands. Millions of civilians armed with bamboo spears, dying for the emperor. To yield now, after all, their blood seemed unthinkable. But others saw a different truth. The nation was starving. The navy lay in ruins. The air force crippled. The allies closing in from every side. And now this weapon beyond comprehension, beyond resistance, as the council dispersed into the shadows of the palace, meets Wanuki men. The unspoken thought lingered. If one bomb could destroy Hiroshima, then the empire itself might soon cease to exist. And deep within, a single question grew louder with every heartbeat. What if America had more? The High Command would soon receive their answer. The reconnaissance photographs arrived first, black and white ghosts that told a story beyond words. Streets that had once bustled with life were gone, replaced by a wasteland of ash, buildings flattened, bridges twisted into molten steel, and in the heart of Hiroshima, where the bomb had burst, nothing remained but a circular void. A scar burned into the earth itself. The images passed from hand to trembling hand inside the imperial palace. No one spoke. What could be said in the face of such ruin? The generals had seen destruction before, from Shanghai to Nanjing, from Manila to Tokyo. But this was not war as they knew it. This was annihilation. When the first eyewitness reports reached Tokyo, disbelief gave way to horror. Survivors spoke of a blinding light that turned morning into white fire, of people vanishing where they stood, leaving only shadows on stone. Doctors described wounds they could not treat, skin that sloughed off at a touch, fevers that burned from within, invisible sickness spreading through the air. They did not yet know the word radiation, but they felt its curse. General Anami listened as his aides recited the numbers. Tens of thousands died within minutes. Tens of thousands more dying slowly, painfully. The military mind searched for meaning. How could they defend against such a weapon? How could they fight a war where a single strike erased a city? In the war councils, anger flared. Some insisted the Americans could not possess many such bombs, perhaps only one, a prototype. Others argued that hesitation would be fatal. The Navy's intelligence officers warned that the United States' vast industry could build more, perhaps hundreds. Their scientists had warned years earlier that whoever mastered atomic fission first would wield a weapon beyond imagination. Now those fears have come true. For the first time, the High Command glimpsed the scale of American power. Not just soldiers and ships, but a fusion of science, industry, and will. A nation capable of reshaping nature itself into a weapon. Still, pride held them back. Anami and his generals clung to the code of Bushido, the way of the warrior. To surrender was dishonor. To fight, even in hopelessness, was purity. They believed Japan's spirit could withstand any weapon, that faith could conquer fire. But as they studied the photos of Hiroshima's ruins, doubt crept into their hearts. What good was spirit against the sun itself? In hushed corridors, some ministers whispered of surrender, others spoke of seeking mediation through the Soviet Union, hoping to preserve the throne and avoid total ruin. Yet, as they debated, the people of Hiroshima continued to die, not from bombs, but from the unseen hand of radiation, a poison carried on the wind. The reports became unbearable. Children with skin like wax, mothers holding infants turned to ash, priests praying over cities of corpses. The High Command could no longer deny what they saw. This was not a weapon of war. It was a warning, a message written in fire. And though they could not yet say it aloud, the message was clear. The old world was ending. The empire, the samurai code, the illusion of invincibility, all had been burned away in a single flash. But even as that truth settled into the hearts of Japan's leaders, another bomb was already being prepared, one that would make belief impossible to escape. 3 days after Hiroshima vanished, another American bomber took flight, Boxcar, heavy with a second atomic weapon. The crew turned toward their secondary target, Nagasaki. Below, people were returning to their routines, unaware that fate had chosen them. At 11:02 a.m., the bomb named Fat Man exploded above the Urkami Valley. A second sun blazed over Kyushu. The earth convulsed. Mountains echoed with thunder. The heart of Nagasaki, its factories, its churches, its homes, dissolved into flame. The blast wave tore through the valley, killing tens of thousands in an instant. Those who survived wandered through a nightmare of firestorms and falling ash, calling out names that would never answer. In Tokyo, word spread like a chill wind. Another city, another bomb, another silence. Any illusion that Hiroshima had been a solitary catastrophe evaporated. The Americans had more. They might have many more. The High Command gathered again. And this time, even the proudest warriors struggled to meet each other's eyes. Prime Minister Suzuki stared at the reports, his face ashen. The War Minister Anami still spoke of resistance, of a final battle to defend the homeland, of honor and annihilation, but his voice faltered. He had seen the photographs, heard the accounts. He knew the truth. No army could fight against the sun. Across the room, Foreign Minister Togo pressed for surrender. To continue is to invite extinction, he warned, but the council was divided. Half demanded unconditional resistance. Half sought a path to end the war. The arguments grew heated, voices rising like the fires that consumed their cities. Then came a new blow. The Soviet Union, once a potential mediator, had declared war. Red Army forces stormed into Manchuria, crushing Japan's last defenses on the continent. The empire was cornered by fire in the sky and steel on the ground. That night, Emperor Hirohito summoned his ministers. They knelt before him, men who had ruled in his name, now trembling before the enormity of defeat. The emperor listened in silence as they spoke of strategy and survival. But when he finally spoke, his words were quiet and absolute. The continuation of the war can only mean the extinction of our nation. For the first time, the divine voice broke the silence. He did not speak of glory, nor vengeance, but of mercy for the people, for the nation, for the generations yet unborn. The High Command was shaken. To oppose the emperor's will was unthinkable. Yet to surrender was to abandon everything they had fought for. Anime's heart was torn between duty and devotion. He swore to protect the emperor, even if it meant bearing the shame of defeat. Others bowed their heads, realizing that Japan had reached the edge of the abyss. In the charred remains of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the truth was already written. The war was lost. The empire's might, its traditions, its gods of war, all humbled by a single blinding flash. The decision would not come easily, nor without blood. But now, in the glow of 2 suns, the path was clear. To live, Japan would have to surrender. And in the chambers of power, the emperor prepared to speak not as a god of war, but as the voice of survival. In the sleepless nights that followed Nagasaki's destruction, Tokyo was heavy with dread. The city, already scarred by firebombs, now felt the weight of an invisible hand closing around the nation. The High Command assembled again within the sheltering walls of the imperial palace, their faces drawn, uniforms damp with summer heat and anxiety. The war had become a question, not of victory, but of existence. Reports from the ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki left no room for denial. 2 cities wiped away by single bombs, tens of thousands burned in moments, survivors afflicted with strange wasting sicknesses. The empire's cities lay in ashes, its navy scattered, its air force crippled, its army cornered, and now the Soviets, once courted for peace, had turned invaders, sweeping through Manchuria with unstoppable force. The Supreme War Council, the Big Six, convened to decide the nation's fate. Prime Minister Suzuki, Foreign Minister Togo, and Navy Minister Yonai pleaded for surrender. War Minister Anami, joined by General Zumeu, and Toyota clung to the old code, fought to the last breath, demanded better terms, and died with honor. The meeting stretched into the night, voices rising, arguments circling like vultures over a dying beast. No consensus could be reached. Outside, Tokyo's streets lay silent, the people waiting for a word they could not imagine. At dawn, an unprecedented summons came. The emperor himself would attend. Hirohito entered the chamber, not as a distant divinity, but as a man burdened by the suffering of millions. The ministers bowed low, eyes averted. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost fragile, yet it carried the weight of centuries. He spoke of the unbearable destruction wrought upon the nation, of the suffering of his people, and of the atomic bomb, a new and most cruel weapon taking the lives of so many innocent ones. He told them that to continue the war was to invite the ruin of the Japanese race. The time had come, he said, to endure the unendurable. The room fell into silence. For the first time in memory, the divine voice had declared the course of the empire. The war would end. Still, even as the decision was made, the shadow of rebellion stirred. Among some officers, whispers spread. Talk of honor, of coup, of seizing the palace to prevent surrender. But Anami, torn between loyalty to the warrior's code and his duty to the emperor, chose submission. He knew the truth. To defy the emperor's will would be the ultimate betrayal. Before dawn, he took his own life, his final act and oath of obedience sealed in blood. The following days passed in a blur of secrecy and fear. The surrender terms were transmitted to the Allies. Their response came swiftly, unconditional, saved the emperor's throne, and so preparations began for an event unlike any in Japan's history. The emperor's voice would be heard by his people. As the recording was made, a fragile voice etched onto wax discs, palace guard stood, watch, fearful of saboteurs. In the stillness of that chamber, Hirohito spoke words that would echo across generations, not as a ruler commanding victory, but as a man asking his nation to live. For centuries, Japan had fought in the name of gods and emperors, for honor, land, and destiny. Now it would surrender not to an enemy's blade, but to the unbearable truth revealed by the light of the atomic bomb. The war that began in ambition would end in revelation. And soon all of Japan would hear the voice of their emperor, a voice of sorrow, humility, and the recognition that the old world had burned away. In the days following the emperor's decision, as Japan prepared to surrender, members of the High Command began to confront the full truth behind the weapon that had ended their empire. American broadcasts spoke openly now of atomic bombs, weapons that drew their strength from the splitting of the atom, a feat once dismissed as theoretical. To understand what they had faced, Japan's scientists and officers gathered fragments of data, survivor accounts, and captured reports. Slowly the picture emerged, and with it war and terror unlike anything they had known. They learned that this was no conventional explosive, but a device born of a scientific revolution, the product of laboratories and universities harnessing forces once hidden in the heart of matter. A single bomb, fueled by uranium or plutonium, carried the energy of thousands of planes, the firepower of entire fleets. The Americans had not stumbled upon it by chance. They had built it meticulously, methodically, with the labor of over 100,000 scientists, engineers, and workers, under a project so vast it spanned continents. For the first time, the generals began to see the scale of their opponent's power. The United States had fused science, industry, and will in a unity beyond anything Japan could match. Their factories ran day and night, untouched by war. Their scientists commanded resources Japan could not dream of. Their leadership had foreseen a future where knowledge itself was a weapon, and had seized it. In secret briefings, Japanese physicists tried to explain the unimaginable. They spoke of nuclear fission, of chain reactions that multiplied energy in a fraction of a second, of heat that rivaled the sun. The officers listened in silence, unable to reconcile such abstractions with the charred photographs before them. They began to understand that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not merely victims of America's might, but symbols of a new age, one where war could erase nations in a heartbeat. Some wept, others sat motionless, their pride dissolving under the weight of this knowledge. For years they had told themselves that spirit could triumph over steel, that devotion could balance industry, that sacrifice could overcome science. Now they saw that faith alone could not fight the atom. The power America wielded was not just military, it was elemental, born of a mastery of nature itself. In the imperial chambers, Hirohito received scientific briefings describing the bomb's force. He understood, perhaps more than his generals, that the world had changed forever. The age of swords and rifles, of courage and sacrifice, had given way to an era ruled by equations and laboratories. To resist this new reality would be suicide. Within the high command, a solemn clarity spread. Their empire, built on conquest and myth, had been humbled by a civilization that waged war, not through tradition, but through knowledge. The lesson was bitter, but undeniable. Japan could no longer cling to the past. Survival would demand understanding, adaptation, and acceptance. The men who had once dreamed of endless expansion now spoke in whispers of reconstruction, of learning from the very enemy who had unmade them. In the silence that followed, they began to grasp what the bomb truly signified. Not merely defeat, but revelation. A mirror held up to humanity's own power and its peril, and as the surrender ceremony drew near, one thought echoed among them. The war had not ended simply because they were beaten. It had ended because a new weapon had shown them a truth that no army could ignore, that the power to destroy the world now rested in human hands. On the morning of August 15th, the empire held its breath. From the smallest fishing village to the crowded ruins of Tokyo, radios crackled to life. At noon, the unthinkable began. The voice of the emperor, the living God, speaking directly to his people for the first time in history. The recording, fragile and trembling with static, carried across the land a voice of solemn grace, weighted with sorrow. Hirohito's words were careful, veiled in formality, yet unmistakable in meaning. The enemy, he said, has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which to do damage is incalculable, taking the lives of so many innocent ones. He spoke of enduring the unendurable, of bowing before an impossible reality to save his people from total annihilation. He did not say the word surrender, but all who listened understood. The war was over. For the first time, the Japanese people heard not the commanding roar of battle, but the fragile tones of humanity from their divine sovereign across the nation. Silence fell, then weeping. Some bowed deeply toward their radios, tears pooling onto Tommy mats. Others sat motionless, unable to accept the words. Soldiers wept openly in their barracks. Mothers clutched their children, whispering prayers for those who would never return. In that moment, the truth that had haunted the high command became the truth of the nation. Japan had been defeated not merely by arms, but by a force beyond imagination. The atomic bomb, the new and most cruel weapon, had ended the war in an instant, and with it, the world they had known. The imperial dream of eternal victory had burned away like paper and fire. In the halls of power, some generals bowed their heads in grief. Others raged silently against fate, but none could deny the emperor's voice. His command was final, his reasoning absolute. To continue the war would bring only extinction. Even the proudest warriors bound by duty laid down their arms. Among the people, confusion mingled with relief. For years they had been told that surrender was shameful, that death was preferable to defeat. Yet now their emperor spoke of life, of survival, as the true act of devotion. Slowly, the understanding spread. Japan would endure, not as conqueror, but as humbled witness to a world forever changed. In the days that followed, American leaflets and broadcasts confirmed what the emperor had declared. Japan's cities were broken, its army scattered, its empire dissolved, but the voice that had guided them into war now guided them toward peace. And though the people mourned, many also felt a quiet gratitude that the emperor had chosen mercy over ruin. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the survivors, burned, scarred, yet alive, listened to the broadcast through tears. For them, the emperor's words were not abstract. They were echoes of the light that had taken everything. They knew what surrender meant. It meant the bombs would fall no more, And so, under a sky once blackened by war, Japan bowed, not to conquerors, but to the truth revealed in fire. The voice of the emperor had spoken. The age of empire was over. A new age, born from ash and understanding, had begun. In the weeks that followed the emperor's broadcast, Japan descended into silence. The guns fell quiet. The soldiers who had sworn to die for the empire laid down their rifles and wept. Across the cities, blackened ruins stretched to the horizon, monuments of ash to a war that had consumed everything. The rising sun flag was lowered, the banners of the empire faded in the smoke, and in the stillness that followed, the people began to understand what had truly ended. For those in the high command who survived, reflection came bitterly. They had believed in destiny, in the unbreakable will of a divine nation, yet they had been defeated not merely by armies, but by knowledge, by a weapon that rewrote the laws of war. The atomic bomb had not just crushed Japan's defenses, it had shattered the illusion that courage alone could shape the world. In the blinding light over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they saw the death of an age, the twilight of the warrior's code, the end of conquest as virtue. General Anami's empty seat in the council chamber stood a silent testimony to the cost of honor. Others faced trials, exile, or quiet disgrace, but all carried the same haunting memory. The photographs of cities erased, the cries of the wounded, the shadows burned into stone. They had glimpsed the edge of humanity's power and the abyss that waited beyond it. As the Americans arrived, the occupation began not with vengeance, but with order. Soldiers marched through shattered streets, offering food and medicine. Scientists and engineers documented the ruins, measuring the unthinkable. Japanese doctors and physicists joined them, humbled witnesses to the atom's wrath. Together, they studied the survivors, the Hiroshima, whose bodies bore the mark of the new age. The nation, stripped of its empire, began to rebuild from the ashes. Steel and glass replaced wood and paper. Schools rose where temples had fallen. Children grew beneath a sky no longer shadowed by warplanes. Yet beneath the hum of reconstruction lingered the unspoken question: how had it come to this? How had pride blinded them to the truth that victory was impossible? For many, the answer lay in understanding. America's power had not sprung from cruelty, but from mastery, a fusion of science, industry, and will that Japan had underestimated. The atomic bomb was not merely a weapon, it was a mirror held up to civilization itself, revealing both brilliance and peril. In its light, humanity saw its own reflection, creator and destroyer bound as one. In time, Hiroshima would become a city of remembrance, its peace dome standing over quiet waters as a plea to the world. Never again. Survivors would tell their stories, their voices trembling yet resolute, warning that the power to end life on earth now rested in human hands. And leaders who once dreamed of conquest would speak instead of peace, knowing the alternative lay written in the ashes. For the Japanese high command, the lesson was carved into memory. Strength without wisdom leads only to ruin. The empire they built through war had perished in fire, but from its ruins rose a new nation, one devoted not to domination, but to understanding, to the pursuit of knowledge that might preserve, not destroy. The world, too, would change. Nations would race to master the atom, haunted by the light that fell over Hiroshima. The balance of power would shift, and the shadow of the bomb would stretch across generations. Yet in that shadow lay a fragile hope that knowing the cost of such power might teach humanity restraint. As Japan surrendered, the old world ended. In its place began the nuclear age, an age where a single act could decide the fate of millions. And on that August morning, when the sky burned white, the Japanese High Command saw not only America's power, but the future of mankind.